Alright, welcome everyone. I know it's been a while since the last video. There's a couple of things that have been happening, and I'm aware that the uploads of the Atlantis game have slowed down because we've currently dealing with a few people who've had to sub out of that game who we haven't been able to fully replace. It may be that at the time this video goes live, we're still actually looking for a replacement for the Pythian player. So if you're watching this and you're interested in joining that game from what you've seen of it, preferably without, too much of the information you've pulled from my videos, then give me a buzz on Discord. It may well be that we still have a spot for you. But in order to keep the content rolling, I've been working on a few projects that should be coming out in relatively short order now. One is I'm looking at doing some magic path analysis for cross paths, so I want to look at the Banefire path, the Stygian path, etc., rather than just looking at the water areas themselves. That's one way I'm considering breaking it down. The other is breaking down spells by their purposes in some sort of larger sense and ordering them that way. And a few more nation analyses that I'm working on. But today, I'm actually going to give you a nation analysis for Early Age Ulm. Now, normally I don't try and analyse nations that other YouTubers have already published nation analyses for. General Confusion has posted a very useful one for Early Age Ulm. My analysis will differ slightly, but the reason we're doing this is because I've decided that I'm going to upload another game. So this is the first turn of another game I was in, this New Patch Smell 2, which was one of the games that was posted after one of the older Dominions 5 patches dropped some months ago now, in which I played EA Ulm, again randomly selected based on a list of available nations on my part. And I figure if I'm going to be covering the game, I may as well cover the nation first and introduce the game setting and cycle. What I'm going to be doing for this game, though, because it has finished but it's a longer game, is doing turns probably in jumps and focusing more on the big picture strategic elements of the game and focusing on specific vignettes when necessary rather than going through each turn. What are the events? What's happening? Blah, blah, blah. I think that's going to be the better approach. I'm happy to hear otherwise and actually do a turn-by-turn approach if necessary, but I think jumping through in maybe say 8 to 9 episodes covering the entire game might be the way to go. With more episodes towards the closing end of the game, where things are at their most intense and complex. And luckily, a couple of people have lent us their save file so that we can see some of the complexities that happen towards the end. Anyway, with enough introduction there, let's talk about Early Age Ulm. So Early Age Ulm is inspired by the Germanic tribes that the Romans encountered as they advanced through Gaul and set their frontier on the Rhine. They are a largely tribal people ruled by shamans, smiths, and chiefs, who are like the three sort of higher social classes that rule over the various tribes. They're a mixture of townsfolk and country folk, and they're renowned to be like tough human warriors of the early age. Full disclosure before I get into this analysis, I think Early Age Ulm is probably the weakest of the three nations in the Ulm line. You wouldn't know that for looking at it at the start, and that's because Early Age Ulm has some very quite pronounced strengths that are obvious very early on, and some quite pernicious weaknesses that become problematic only later in the game. However, if you look at the other two nations in the Ulm lineup, you'll just see that they're just incredibly high performers. Middle Age Ulm is famous for having quite possibly the best troop lineup in the game in terms of cost efficiency, and having, of course, the Master Smiths that are capable of forging items at a 2-gem discount, which leads to the amazing 5-gem item for 1-gem combination that allows them to break many aspects of the game, particularly the trade component, and if they can get access to thugs, to thug out chassis really, really easily. They have access to Iron Blizzard, which is an amazing... It's a value evocation, and gives you something really good to do with your recruit anywhere mages. Late Age Ulm is obviously a blood, astral, stealth, free spawn nation, which is a lot of the words that get a lot of high tier players very excited, and when you put them together gives you a very powerful nation. Not as broken as it was when they used to be able to summon infinite vampires at Tech 0, but they can still summon a very significant number of vampires get their blood economy really ramped up, support with free spawn patrollers. Every blood nation wish they had free spawn patrollers, Late Age Ulm does. EA Ulm has none of that. EA Ulm is a nation which lacks the depth of the forging discount and the powerful evocations. It lacks the astral access. It lacks the blood. It just lacks a lot of what makes the latter two nations particularly feared on the field of battle. But what Early Age Ulm does have is the best wannabe elves anywhere in Dominions. That is, these humans, the human troops of Early Age Ulm come closer to being elves without being elves than any other nation in the game, I would argue. And that is at the, I suppose, the center of their efficacy. So let's talk about what you have available as Early Age Ulm, what makes you really strong and dangerous, and where your pronounced weaknesses are. So actually, I'll do it this way. And then we'll talk through the actual game once I've done the nation analysis. So this is Early Age Ulm's lineup. Troops, commanders, as always. Common themes among almost all of these troops as you'll go through, you'll see almost all of your troops and most of your mages are stealthy, and they have a series of survival. So we'll quickly click through. Warrior Scout. He's a good scout. He's recruitable anywhere. He's got more weapons than the average scout. He's got a whole bunch of survivals. He's ambidextrous. He's just a slightly better scout. However, you can also get away with using commanders as scouts in a pinch, because your commanders, the warrior chiefs, who are relatively cheap and have like a decent stat line for a human, like 16 hit points, 13, 13. Good. That's a good stat line for a human. I mean, you'd never pay 75 just for the punching power, usually. But good leadership, so leadership 80 means +1 morale, and has the mountain survival, forest survival, stealthy, snow move, cold resistant combo. You will see this on almost all of your troops. And when you put this together, what this means is you don't take the fatigue penalties for really cold environments. You can move across snow as if it wasn't snowy, so you don't lose your mobility. You'll notice 14 map move. You don't lose mobility in the snow. Mountain survival, forest survival. So forests don't slow you down, mountains don't slow you down, and you can cross mountain passes even when they would normally be closed. That's one benefit of mountain survival, which is easy to forget. And it can mean that sometimes Ulmish troops can move across mountain passes to attack provinces, and then retreat back across those mountain passes against enemies that can't actually cross and retaliate, and it can be infuriating. I've seen that done in a game. So Warrior Chief, decent. Can be recruited in forests, and this will be another theme you encounter for a number of these leaders. They can be recruited in not forted provinces if those provinces are forests, and that means you can ramp up production quickly because you need less infrastructure. Warrior Smiths. So Warrior Smiths are not as powerful as their middle age incarnations. A Warrior Smith is a 110 gold non-stealthy. So this guy's not stealthing with your forces. Support stay-at-home mage for the most part. E1 random. This is your random set, so you get one of fire, air, water, or earth, and a 50% chance at doing the same again. So at most E2, A2, W2, or hypothetically E3, but more likely a spattering of random cross paths. This means that most Warrior Smiths will not be able to cast anything useful. Most Warrior Smiths will not be useful, however, some will random E2, a very small number will random E3, and those mages are particularly useful, and mages that double up and some of the others are useful, but mostly you're looking for these for forging purposes. Research 9 is not great on a 110 gold non-sacred mage, and they don't have Drain Researcher, unlike the middle-aged Ulmish Warrior Smith. But they are cold resistant and all that sort of stuff. They give 5 resource bonus and forge bonus 1, so this is... You get a few more resources, not a huge number, but a few more resources and forge bonus 1. So they're still going to give you more of a discount relative to other nations. This still means you're paying 2 rather than 3 gems for a 5 gem item when you're using a hammer. However, you need to random the right way, and you will random the right way to get a hammer. But they're an advantage, but they don't make items as stupidly cheap as the middle-aged equivalent do. Nonetheless, these guys do mean that Early Age Ulm has significant forging capability in the 5 gem item range. If the item is cheap and you have path access to it, then you can make lots of them relatively cheap. Not insanely cheap, but still cheap. The Shaymin is in many ways, your primary recruit anywhere mage. He can come from forests as well. He is sacred. The pathing here is very similar. You get E1, and then the only difference here is that you're replacing water with death. And earth gets replaced with nature. So you've brought in those sort of more naturalistic sorceress paths as options. So your still base is earth. You're still going to get earth randoms, but this is how you get death access. You can death up to death 2, but you're going to have to recruit a lot of shamans to be, have a decent chance of getting that, and you can also get small amounts of nature on your recruit anywheres. They have less research. They're level 1 priests. They have less research in Researcher 2. However, they're sacred, so they're half upkeep, which is not made up for the fact that they're 20 gold more expensive. So if you have magic scales, as I do, as Early Age Ulm, they're your more cost-efficient researchers, although not as quick to ramp up as if you dump a bunch of smiths in your forts. They are cost-efficient, and they're stealthy. And being stealthy is important because it means that shamans can accompany your troops who are stealthy. And I think the idea of having mages... I would rather have invisible armies with some magic support than visible armies with slightly better magic support, even if the warrior smiths were slightly better. Because they can be recruited anywhere, because they're fast, 16 map move, and they have a bunch of survivals, and thus can keep up with your armies, shamans will be the bulk of your mage recruits, in my view. At least with the way I play the game. Antlered shamans are cap-only slow to recruits. So antlered shamans are a good deal, I would say, and they would be a better deal if they were recruit anywhere, but they're not. You keep your 16 map move, you keep your stealth and survivals, you keep priest level 1. This is the highest level priest you get. You do not get higher than priest level 1 as EA Ulm, which is always a little bit problematic. Recruitable Holy 3s are a great strength for a nation. You don't have it. E2, N2, 1 random, 10% chance. That's not much. So most of the game, you have to assume that what you're getting is E2, N2. And note that you can get close to that with the right randoms on a shaman. You can go N2, E1 or E2, N1. All these guys do is reliably give you this combination right here. This is sort of useful. E2 is enough for earth power and then some evocations. N2 is enough for you to get out to be quite an efficient swarm caster, or with a little bit of boosting or some extra gems, you can do all sorts of nature buffing. And this combination, this Earth-Nature cross-path, is the Strength of Gaia cross-path as well, which is worth keeping in mind for nature boosting and also giving things like bar skin, regeneration, etc. It's a good unit, it's just cap only. 220 gold for this is a good rate. I would recruit more of them if they were not cap only. Unfortunately, they are. And even then, this pathing is not incredible. The early age is dominated by big hitting mages, and we'll look at some of the other nations we're up against in this game. And they can get much more impressive path access than just reliable E2, N2. We'll come back to the mages then and talk about what that means, but that's your lineup in terms of commanders. Now, here's your troop lineup. And remember, when you're thinking about how many of these troops you can afford, remember, Ormish forts produce 25% more resources, and Ormish warrior smiths produce extra resources, and you're a scales nation, so you're probably going to have additional resources. That said, let's talk units, and I'll focus on the ones that are really important, and I'll skim through the ones that are shit. Axe Warriors. Axe Warriors are awesome. Okay, so what is the role of an Axe Warrior? An Axe Warrior fits a design philosophy. It's like if someone is told to design a vehicle or a machine, and they're given a very specific purpose, and like a good engineer in some senses, they take away everything in the design that isn't directly related to their particular goal. The role of an Axe Warrior is to kill things. It is to kill things, that whether they're big, small, hard, armored, doesn't matter. The goal of the Axe Warrior is to kill things quickly. Nothing in this thing says survivability. Nothing in this chassis says balance. It's all about murder. So, what have you got? You've got stealthy, snow move, mountain survival, forest survival, the full set. And you've got ambidextrous, so the multi-weapon setup works relatively well. 14 map move, and only 4 encumbrance. This thing is thus able to move strategically quite quickly, and it's able to fight for a reasonable period of time. It is cheap. 10 gold, 10 resources, 9 recruitment points. Nice balanced cost line. Because these things can be recruited in or out of forts, so from forests as well, you can shit these out. Axe warriors can come in very, very large numbers. Like all Ulmish humans, they're quite strong. They've got 12 strength. That's 2 more than your average human. They have more hit points than an average human, 13. That's a 30% increase on your average human, and a less than 30%, but still significant increase on your average trained soldier in the human lineup. The protection rating is it's not horrible. 10's not horrible. It means that you'll probably take 2 hits from, an average human hitting you rather than 1. You may even take 3 rather than 2. But like all Ulmish units, they have shitty magic resistance, and because they've got all these weapons, they have low defense skill, because there's no shield here, they're dual wielding, they're all aggression all the time. However, and this is notable as the Ulmish combo, higher morale than average, lower magic resistance than average. However, the big draw here is that you get 2 axes and a throwing axe. So they have 1 axe in each hand, and I don't know, he holds this in his teeth and swings his neck, or I don't know. There's some off-color jokes I could make about where they keep the 3rd axe. Anyway, you get 2 axes at attack skill 10, but you've got high attack density in square, so you're going to be harassing your opponent. So this attack skill 10 is actually de facto higher than in reality, and a range weapon. And these are very high damage attacks. 20 damage, just straight out of the box. Throw Strength of Giants on its 24. This means you can get slashing damage through most of the protection that you'll encounter in the early era. And against high HP blob, low protection targets, you'll murder them incredibly quickly. This guy is the Bane of Giants. This guy is the Bane of heavily armored, but not quite heavily armored enough targets. A lot of basic thug designs can fail to this. He's vulnerable to Vine Shield because of his lower magic resistance, but every warrior that swings is more attacks than average. And having the throwing axes on the way in can actually do some significant damage because they're only thrown at close range, which means the precision's not as much of a problem, and they can do quite significant damage. So the Axe Warrior is an excellent murder unit, and later on, if you can give him protection buffs, you can actually keep him alive long enough to do it. The Warrior is an inferior Axe Warrior, in my view. The Warrior is nominally more balanced because he has a sword, which gives him slightly higher defense skill, even though he does lower damage, and he hits with slightly higher attack value. So he's more likely to hit with his primary weapon than the Axe Warrior is. However, you do a little less damage, and you lose the throwing axe. I consider that a strictly inferior version of the Axe Warrior. There may be niche circumstances, I'm not up on them. Archers are not worth your time. So, for most nations, this archer would be, okay in the early age, especially if you had like flaming arrow access or something. It's pretty cheap, low resource cost. Ulm used a lot of female troops, as you are probably noticing as we go through. But you lose all of those fancy weapons. You lose a lot more protection. You go down to Prot 4, and yeah, sure, you still have a short bow and decent stats. So be a okay independent unit, but there's only 9 damage on the short bow and you're only precision 11. This nation's about hitting hard. This nation's about doing lots of damage with your infantry really quickly. It's not like the middle-aged Ulmish infantry that can kind of like sit and not die in someone's face. It's about getting in their face and killing them really quickly. A lot of your damage is coming from infantry, so I wouldn't bother with archers, especially since your troops don't have amazing prot and will take friendly fire. Forest warriors can be recruited in all forests. I don't recruit forest warriors. Forest warriors, you look at them for the first part, and they actually look like a strictly superior in some way Axe Warrior for a little bit more gold. You pay 12 gold, you pay more resources, more rec points, but you go up to 13 protection. Hey, look, this is not bad. It's not stealthy. Maybe their armor clanks too much. I don't know. Like I know some people who own scale hauberks and they don't clank. There's no reason they would clank if you properly maintain them and maybe wear padding over them or things like that. But yeah, they're not stealthy, so leave them at home. Mountain warriors suffer from a very similar problem, recruitable from all mountains. Again, higher protection, slightly higher cost. These guys are the equivalent of warriors, and they have the sword rather than the throwing axe and the double axe lineup. But again, not stealthy, and if it's not stealthy, I don't want it as as Early Age Ulm, because the difference between an army being invisible and visible is a big one, as we'll talk about in the strategy section. Warrior Maidens. Warrior Maidens suffer from the same problem that archers have. Why is Early Age Ulm using archers? This isn't going to kill people quickly enough, so we're not going to dwell. Especially when, for the same gold, I can recruit some other troops. So this is slightly better, I guess. Like this is now we're looking at a slightly tanky Ulmish unit, because women are the only ones in Early Age Ulmish culture who go against the cultural rule that you shouldn't use shields as a general infantryman. Apparently. Says the use of shields was once despised as cowardly in Ulm, but shield maidens have survived a lot of battles because they use them, even when they're outnumbered. So people are like, oh yeah, maybe the shield is worth something rather than the triple axe combination. Anyway, so shield maiden looks like a good deal. Your defense skill goes up. This is a high morale, moderate cost, with one reasonably good damage attack. It is stealthy. It has all the survival skills. It looks like a good deal, but for just a little bit more gold, you can get a second short sword instead with ambidextrous. And your defense skill's only 12 because short swords have a defense value of 1 and you've got 2 of them, so you're getting 2 from the weapon modifier. So this is a really good unit because for a slightly larger investment and a little bit of decrease in defense, you still have a reasonable prot value, but you double your damage output. And doubling your damage output, in fact, more than, because you're going to get harass penalty off it. So against certain targets, you're going to more than double your damage output. This is a much better unit. And the Steel Maiden joins the Axe Warrior as the 2 primary troop units of the Early Age Ulm lineup, in my view. Steel Maidens being recruited from forts as the more expensive unit, and Axe Warriors making up the balance, being the low rec point recruit from forest option. So Iron Warriors. Iron Warriors are a niche pick. Very niche. You pick Iron Warriors when 25 damage is worth more to you than multiple attacks, which is very hard. Like, it's very hard to overcome the value of multiple attacks in an infantry unit. So 25 blunt damage has to be worth more to you than 2 20 damage axe attacks, even though it comes with additional cost, and you have to be willing to give up stealth, because Iron Warriors are not stealthy. And for that reason, as you'll see in this game, I do not recruit a single Iron Warrior because those conditions are never met for me. This damage is never worth giving up the second attack. I'd rather throw more attacks and try and crit through in most cases. Or in the case of Steel Maidens, because half of the time short swords do piercing, half the time they're lopping 20% off of protection value. So against a hypothetical 20 prot thug, the 20 damage axe and the 16 damage short sword, when it rolls piercing, are the same in terms of damage output, but with higher attack value on the Steel Maiden. You don't get that benefit with the Maul, you just get 25 blunt damage. I don't think they're worth it. Then there's your Sacred, cap only Sacred. Let's see what you get. 28 gold, oof. So you get 2, and this is going to be the problem for the Steel Warrior as I go through this analysis. For every 1 Steel Warrior, you can get 2 Steel Maidens. So for every 1 attack you can get out of these guys, you can get 4 out of the Steel Maidens. Or 6 out of the Axe Warriors if you include their head swing throwing axe. 28 gold, 17 resources, 31 recruitment points, but you can only recruit them in the capital. Map move 12, so they're slower than the rest of your troops. You'll look here and you go, ah, shit. Ah, shit, they're not stealthy. Instantly demoted, in my view, by virtue of not being able to sneak along with the rest of your guys. They're significantly cold resistant and they're sacred. And they have good stats: 13 strength, 15 hit points, 13 protection, 14 morale. This is a good, strong infantry unit, but it's very expensive, and yet 125 damage greatsword attack. Now, you can get 125 damage attack at attack skill 12 for 14 gold, or 1 at attack skill 13 for 28 gold. They're both not stealthy, so it's a fair comparison. So your Bless would have to make up for the fact that this unit is just more expensive while not being much better than your other troops. Plus, they're basically grown-up child warriors. So, if you want to support that, recruit Steel Warriors. I prefer to imagine that they've all been released back to civilian professions, while the ladies and the barbarians from the forest do the fighting instead. Steel Warriors are not worth the cost unless they have a significant bless, and Early Age Ulm is crying out for scales more than a massive bless, so Steel Warriors usually get to stay at home. The first ever multiplayer game of Dominion I played, where we were just screwing around with new players, someone actually ran a Thunder Weapons Barskin bless on Steel Warriors, and they were actually pretty scary, but only in the sense that anything with Barskin and Thunder Weapons is a little bit scary, and you can't mass many of them, and you just kill them with evocations and you're done. I don't think Steel Warriors are worth it. So let's sum up. What have you got? I think that there are two divisions in Ulm. There are the things that are stealthy and the things that are not. And anything that isn't stealthy gets relegated to hanging around at home. Because when you have commanders that are stealthy, two types of mage that are stealthy, including your big guys, and then enough troops, including arguably your best troops, the Axe Warrior and the Steel Maiden, who are stealthy. This says all of your armies should be stealthy all the time. And that shapes our strategy. So what is our strategy as Ulm, and where are our weaknesses? Well, our strategy early on is inevitably going to be troop-led expansion transitioning into elfing. What do I mean by that? Well, in the early game, and you can see here I've spawned in this location here. In the early game, putting out a reasonable number of Steel Maidens with a few Axe Warriors just to fill out my recruitment queue. This amount, coupled with the starting army, which is not great, but it does feature some Axe Warriors, can expand. And then a turn or two after that, you can produce another expansion party. Your troops are killy enough in the earliest age that you can murder most independent types with relatively few losses by just lawnmowering through them before they get to throw many attacks at you. So your early game tactic is going to be run over things and people with your troops. You're then going to want to pick an early game target. And the combination of factors that play in Ulm's favour mean that they're very, very, very well adapted at fighting, particularly giants early game. Giants suffer from the problem that they have relatively low attack values and terrible attack density and rely on sacks of hit points to protect them while having moderate armor values in most cases. Those moderate armor values will not protect them from a square which is putting out 6 20 damage attacks or 6 16 damage piercing attacks per turn. So attacking someone like Niflheim, attacking someone like Makoni, I would attack Hinnom, people who you normally wouldn't want to mess with. Well, okay, you wouldn't want to mess with Makoni, but you wouldn't want to mess with Niflheim or Hinnom normally. So you fare very well against giants, you fare very well against anyone who is vulnerable to your tactic of running up and shanking them. And a lot of people can be shanked early game before magical support comes online. You're weak against certain things, and you will see that this game. But that's your early game tactic. Mid game, you can transition into next level elfing play. And by next level, I mean it's not just your raiders that will be stealthy. In fact, you don't really have thuggy units. You can do it, but you're going to inevitably be using human HP units to thug. And the two options you can use, in my view, are you can have Warrior Chiefs Thug, where they're entirely reliant on their items and okay hit point pool and decent stats, or you can use Shamans, who have worse stats and lower hit points, but have some earth magic and some self-buff, and you'll see me use those this game. So you can thug, but you're not going to thug like someone who has Vanyarls, for example. They're just much, 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 much better at it and not too much more expensive. What you can do is you can elf people with your troops. You can take small groups of your units, and against PD, the situation all game will be pretty much the same as the situation you have in Indies early game. Your troops murder them. So a small group of troops with led by a warrior chief, for example, can raid stealth perfectly effectively. Just as well as someone can with Vanyarls. And you can do it moderately cost effectively. I would say your raiding strategy is probably more expensive in gold and less expensive in gems. Putting together, say, 20 Steel Maidens is going to cost you 280 gold, plus you have to pay for a leader, whereas, let's see, I had a Vanheim in this game. Vanyal, 275 gold. You could try and do it with a Vanhurst, but yeah, Vanhurst maybe. Like, I know people do it, but Vanyal certainly can thug, and a Vanyal is 275 gold. So you're spending a little more gold, but the Vanyal, 1, takes up fort recruitment points, and 2, has to have items in most cases. A Vanyal unsupported, without items, will actually lose to that collection of Steel Maidens because they will harass down this defense penalty. Eventually they'll pop the glamour and doesn't have enough protection. Even if he goes something like Mist Form, the Mist Form will eventually won't save him from the number of attacks that are coming in. And Mirror Image, again, volume of attacks. So you're saving gems and you're spending more gold. Perfectly reasonable deal. You can also make your entire army go like that. So, and that's something that very few nations can do. You can actually take a fully integrated army, huge, with like a huge mass of troops, a bunch of mages geared, and some big support casters, and you can just appear in particular locations, and your troops are cheap enough that you can crack forts, and you can then assault forts with support out of nowhere because everything can come along stealthy. Now, it is possible for other nations to do that. For example, all elves could do this because they all have glamour and as such are stealthy. But they're a little more expensive. It's a little less efficient for them to do it. But they can do it too. But you can do it cheaper. Not to the same quality, but you can do it cheaper, which makes you entirely competitive in that style of play, in my view. So what you're hearing so far is that you have a really strong early game in terms of expansion because your troops are really good. You have good opportunities for early game wars because that's when your troops being good matters. In the mid game, your elfing strategies can make life really, really hard for people operationally and provide you some protection and give you strategic ambiguity because most people won't see most of your units most of the time and they'll never know if you're infiltrating. So you'll be treated like an elf in that regard. And your mid-game is also fortified by your forging advantage. You have a forge discount with fire access, which means your research, as soon as you get some fire random warrior smiths and some earth random warrior smiths so you can get hammers and get to construction 6, you will start forging lightless lanterns for 2 gems per, and your research will go critical, as long as you've searched for fire gems in the early game. So, our research is going critical, our troops are great, we can elf people, this is all sounding really, really awesome. What are our problems? And I think the problems, in some ways, it's the late age Pythian problem, I don't think it's quite as bad, but it's still pretty bad, is that the mage lineup isn't good enough. In particular, the mage lineup isn't good enough for later on in the game, when the demand shifts from small buff casters to as many big casters as you can. So, the average Shaymin can do stuff. They can do some stuff with certain random paths. And what you'll do is you'll fish out the useful ones and you'll leave the not useful ones at home. Same with warrior smiths if you need that the water access. E2s can do buffing. They can go summon earth power, go E3, and that gets you in range to do a lot of the buffs. They can do the fire randoms. A double fire random can do Phoenix Power and then do Fire Magic. 1 fire gem later on can hold a jar of fire and become a pillar of fire caster or something like that because you've got... You'll struggle to find good late game stuff they can do. D1's not useful. D2's useful, but you don't have many of those. They're very, very rare and valuable resources. So D1 is kind of useless. N1 is useful as a swarm caster and not much else. If you get high enough, you can use Strength of Gaia, which is handy. Your big casters are good. They're boostable. They can do nature buffs and earth buffs, but they're not huge casters. This is the era of Panai, of big casters. I mean, if you look at... Who are we going to compare to? Who's in this game? We can look at almost anyone. So, if you're Ermor, for example, you have the Augur Elder for 210 gold. Gets you Fire 2, Astral 1, Death 2, and a random, and because you're Astral, you can wire them into a communion. This guy can throw anything from these paths by the end game, because he's a communion, he's a big caster anyway, and he's supported by really cheap communion mages. Sauramacia, for 145 gold, recruit anywhere, Astral 1, D2, N1. All Inaris are useful, and the ones that, like, they're reliable, good picks, and they can be supported by, in Astral terms, by soothsayers, who are cheap and will get Astral 90% of the time as their communion slaves. They can buff up and they can throw big late game magic, or early game, they can just summon skeletons at people. The Tianqi, Tianqi's not as good, but they get the Celestial Master as their cap only, who I would argue is useful, giving you very wide-ranging sort of access. And the Master of the Five Elements, again, rainbow-style access, and good summons to support it. We could keep going. Eagle Kings, here, Eagle King, great example. F4, very small chance to go A5, A4. So a Stormcaster out of the box. This is the early age in a nutshell. Big casters everywhere. N4 with, I believe, a small random chance? No. Very small random chance on the nature. But, big nature and a blood access. So if you want to throw mass protection, mass regen, relief, howl, all those late game spells, middle and late game spells, Pan can do it. The air equivalents, Fog Warriors, easy for Caleb. Even the other Elvish nations, A3, N2, and a random, so A4 randoms. You're missing a big mage. You're missing a big mage that can easily throw, or astral access. Big mage or astral access to easily throw the big game spells. So you need to transition into summons if you're going to do anything useful. And it's hard for you to get to most of those big summons because your access is shallow and it is limited, which is problematic. So where you're going to struggle with Ulm is you're going to struggle to bring out big magical tools to counter everyone else's elements later in the game. And that's unfortunate. And I think it draws this nation back from being really, really useful in the fact that magic increasingly rules over time, and while your strategic ability to screw with people's heads by elfing them and raiding them, moving around them, murdering their PD, and having your mages anywhere continues to be relevant, unless you can tack on extra things to the nation really quickly, eventually your mages are going to burn out. I don't think this is as much of a problem as it is for certain other nations, because unlike, say, Late Age Pythium, that is also in this position, your strengths come early and are strong enough and are in an age where it is forgiving of that, and you have your troop advantage and your stealth advantage are enough to help you hopefully get ahead enough, early enough, that late game you're in a position to make that transition. And the research engine you can run off Master Smith matters in that respect. The final thing to talk about in terms of Ulm is the role of death, and this has been... General Confusion's a big advocate for the role of death in Early Age Ulm. That's because Ulm gets national skeletons. I don't have any reanimated here, but you'll inevitably encounter some in this playthrough. Reanimated Ulmish skeletons are much better than ordinary skeletons because most of them have really high damage greatswords, and a lot of them have very high prot. They still have low MR and low HP, but they hit really, really hard. This can be really, really cool. And I think if you don't have... Here's my take on this. If you don't have high death access on your Pretender, then the reanimation path is perfectly fine, because you only get very shallow death accesses on. You're going to cap at D2, which means you're going to cap at D3 with the Skull Star forged by one of your very rare special Snowflake. 1 in 4 will make the first check to death 1, and then an eighth of the ones that make that first one. So 8, 16, 24, 32. So 1 in 32 Shaymans will go death 2 on average, and so after you make 32 Shaymans, you'll be able to make a staff and get yourself up to D3. And you're going to be doing a lot of your searching probably at D1 or D2, depending on whether or not you have access from anywhere else. At that shallow level of access, there's not much you can do with your death other than reanimate your National Long Dead and produce them and use them to augment your troops. My problem with this is your troops are already very good. Giving Ulm another way to get good killy troops is not necessary, especially when it's using what will be for Ulm a rare and valuable resource, which is the death gem, because you're searching for it is not great. In this game, I actually have high death access on the Pretender, and the reason I do that is because I want access to late game immortal summons, the Lich and the Wraith Lord, and also, well, actually I won't spoil anything. But yeah, I wanted access to Liches and Wraith Lords because I figured I can produce gear for them relatively cheaply, and I can start producing thugs and transition, play the immortal game really, really well because I have that forging advantage. But I'm not completely sold on that idea. I think Early Age Ulm can be played with heavy scales and a Pretender, which gives you access to something you otherwise wouldn't have, preferably an ability to break into summons, which can then broaden your magical access and give you access to the firepower you need later in the game. Sorry. Maybe that's as simple as someone who can summon Kokithiads, Naiads, Troll Kings, Vine Kings. Just have a plan, have something, have the ability to break into something else in a big way later on, so you have the supportive magic and the thugs and or something that you can use to augment your army, because your army will eventually go obsolete. And I promise you'll get to explore a little bit of that in this game to come. Let's talk God and Scales in the final part. Here I'm not going to be particularly determinative because I played one game as Early Age Ulm and I played them my way. So my way is that my thinking goes, Early Age Ulm has problems and it has strengths. Its strength is its amazing troops. Its problems are its narrow magic access. And its other strength is its combination of cold resistance and snow move. So my suggestion for Ulm is a Scales build. So because early on in the game you don't need your Pretender, because you don't have the research to do anything with high magical paths, and your troops expand perfectly well. So I went growth, order, production, dumped cold, and then I went luck and magic. I went full frickin' Scales. We'll see the god when he wakes up in this game. I can't remember exactly what the final scales are. I think it's only luck 2, but I think I have cold 3, so I'm not sure why I started at cold 2 in the capital. The magic 3 is to get the research going even quicker. It'll get me to const 6 quicker, it will get me to lanterns quicker, it will get me to critical tools quicker. And since my researchers are not great, but they are relatively cheap, so the Shaymin is cheap, not fast, this makes Shaymins faster. A Shaymin is still not an amazing researcher. You'll get 10 research points for 130, not amazing. Master Smiths will be, Warrior Smiths will be producing 12 for 110, but not sacred. It's okay. It keeps me in the game until I get to Lantern Point, and then we'll go from there. I think this is all about a Scales build. I do not think Early Age Ulm needs an expander. I think if Early Age Ulm needs an expander, you're doing it wrong. Is an expander useful? Sure, but more troops are useful and they scale up more, and I think there's a diplomatic advantage to being a Scales build normally, because it means you don't have to be as big in order to be functional. The research is extra important because I figure I need to get to breakpoints in order to get out of my limited magical state as soon as possible. Spoiler, my Pretender for this game was a Demi-Lich. I went with an Air Death Demi-Lich. This is because I did not know that you cannot Cloud Trapeze, and while you can teleport an immobile, you can't Cloud Trapeze an immobile. Makes me wonder why people can't just, pick up the bag of the skull and drop it on the cloud or whatever when it appears. I don't know. So I had hoped to have an Immortal Wind of Death caster. As a secondary use, my primary use was always to have air and death access in order to break into more schools, and only those 2 schools, in order to give myself some flexibility later on in the game. So the Giant of Ulm is my god, and he is an imprisoned Demi-Lich. Rockin' awesome scales and great death and air access, so you'll see him later. We'll close out by having a little bit of a look at the game that we're about to be in. So let's walk through those nations. Like most games set up by General Confusion is not in this game, but almost everyone here is a significant person on his channel. So we have Early Age Ermor, Ulm, Saramatia, Tianchi, Abyssia, Kalem, Pan, Tinanog, Femoria, Vanheim, Helheim, I think the stronger Heim, Niflheim, also a very strong Heim. Yomi, who I'm glad to see Yomi in a game. Hinnom, not happy to see Hinnom in a game. Makoni, because champion picking Makoni. And Therados. And for bonus points, spoiler alert, in terms of my neighbours, I am Ulm. Therados is like here. So, yeah, so Therados is my eastern neighbour, and then I bought a Calum. Makoni's here, Helheim's here, Saramatia is here, Yomi is over on the other, Yomi and Ermor on the other sides of the lake. Tina Nog is up there. So, I bought a Therados. And I sure as heck don't have magic weapons, and I don't have early game evocations. And for bonus points, Therados is played by Mr. Root, and he is once again rockin' Christine. He had informed us all by this point that Christine was a Kraken. Spoiler alert, I didn't believe him, because I seldom believe anything Mr. Root says, unless he agrees to make it a binding pact. I didn't believe it was a Kraken, and spoiler alert, it turns out not to be a Kraken. So, hopefully this will be fun. Hopefully you're all excited. It's a big game. How many was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16's a big game. Not as big as, I think, the last one, which was like 20. But hopefully we'll do as well as we can. We'll jump forward a couple of turns at a time to see the big decision points of the game and how we progress and the big choices we make. But I will stop and focus on minutiae if and when people prove interested. So, summary. Ulm, great troops, stealthy, wannabe elves, lots of cool tools, amazing early game power, decent middle game tricks. Needs to be built with the design to break into something else in the late game because your diversity is not enough to carry you. Your mages aren't strong enough, your mages aren't available enough, your pathing's not good enough. You need more. So build an option or have a plan, otherwise you're likely to be limited and eventually die on the vine and suffer the same fate as Late Age Pythium. That's been my mixed but fond review for Early Age Ulm, and I'll see you once the game gets started.